Good morning. I'm Darrell Gunter, your host for Leadership on WSOU 89.5 FM and streaming on the net at WSOU.net. Well, I'm so happy to have the authors of this great new book, The Execution Challenge, Delivering Great Strategy at Scale. We have the authors, Mr. Brian H. Cameron, a Penn State professor, and Miss Whynde Kuehn. And welcome to the program, Brian and Whynde.
Thanks for having us.
You know,
Great to be here.
It's great to have you guys on to talk about the execution challenge, delivering great strategy at scale, which is really a topic that has been written about, but it's tough to perfect. It is really tough to perfect. But before we jump in, Brian and Whynde, can you give our guests a little bit about your information about your background, education, etc.? Brian?
Sure, I'm happy to start. So I'm Brian Cameron. I'm the Associate Dean for Professional Graduate Programs and Executive Education in the Smeal College of Business at Penn State. I'm also a clinical professor of information systems. And in addition to those titles, I also am a senior Cutter analyst, where I published a number of analyst briefs and have done consulting with a variety of different organizations and areas around business architecture, strategy execution, enterprise architecture, et cetera. So that's a little bit about me.
That's nice.
And
And Whynde, welcome back.
yeah, good to see you. We were saying I wrote a book a couple years ago, so we were talking about that book not too long ago. But I am longtime practitioner, thought leader, educator on the idea of strategic business architecture and how to leverage it for strategy, execution, and transformation. So I've led enterprise-wide transformations. I've been an advocate for this discipline around the world. I'm a co-founder of a not-for-profit organization called the Business Architecture Guild, and exercise the ideas every chance I get.
Excellent, excellent. So let's jump into the book. What is this book about? Because as soon as you say strategy, a lot of business people go, "Oh no, another book on strategy." Tell us about your book and how did it come about?
Would you like me to start, Whynde?
Sure, go for it.
Okay, all right. Well, the book, the genesis of the book is really a series of different events in my mind that Whynde and I collectively have experienced and brought together. So strategy execution is one of the top challenges for organizations and has been for a very long time. And as I've worked with organizations over the years, I've seen that while, they set good strategy, and Michael Porter and others confirmed this with their research, oftentimes that strategy gets poorly executed or maybe not executed at all in some cases. And a lot of times it's from my experience, it's because there's not a direct link between the strategy and changes to strategy. Strategy is a living thing. It changes as your conditions in the market change. But oftentimes the execution level, the project level, falls out of alignment with the current state of strategy. And if you look at statistics from Michael Porter, he claims that in any given organization, less than 5% of the people at any given time even know what the strategy is. So how do you align project's execution level with something that very few people understand, and in many cases is constantly evolving and changing? So that's what business architecture brings to the table. A way to create a line of sight between strategy, current state of strategy, changes in strategy, and a way to create that line of sight and alignment with your execution level, project level, in the form of project portfolios, and helps ensure that those project portfolios are in line with the current state of strategy and that you're doing the right projects at the right time. So to answer your question, we both have seen similar things in the organizations that we've worked with. And Whynde and I came together through the Business Architecture Guild. I serve as an academic advisor to the Business Architecture Guild. And when we're comparing our notes, we saw that there's a real role for business architecture in strategy execution. So about 8 years ago, I started teaching a graduate course, an online graduate course in strategic business architecture and how to use business architecture to effectively execute strategy. And over time, it's developed such a following. It went from 20 people in the initial offering once a year to now have over 150 people in 2 offerings, a fall and spring offering. And it's being populated more and more by strategic planning people. We have a strategic planning master's program, and this is an elective course, and I'm getting quite a following from that audience. And they've told me this is what they've been looking for, that, how to really create this line of sight, this alignment between strategy and your project level execution. So I'll stop there. So Whynde, please take it from there.
Yeah, and of course, I see and feel and experience this gap between strategy and execution in my consulting and advisory work with organizations. So have been out there leveraging business architecture at a pretty big scale to be able to bridge that gap for organizations and gaining traction, right? As you said, Brian, there's a lot of uptick for these ideas. And, as we were thinking about this book, we asked ourselves, why write another book on strategy execution? But the gap we're filling, right? Up until this point, there's really not been a holistic view of the business to underpin strategy execution, decision making, and create that line of sight that Brian's talking about. So, really trying to fill that gap and also help people to understand that strategy execution is a critical muscle, right? It's a critical ability that organizations need to have to be able to change and adapt and continue leading.
You know, in my consulting business, I see the gaps so wide, and it's dealing with the human being in regards to getting folks to create new habits within themselves. Within your book, do you address the human element and how you're able to have managers to manage appropriately and have the individuals to be held accountable to fulfill that? Well, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
sure. Yeah, we do. I think you hit on a really key point that the biggest change is the human change, because this is about different ways of thinking and different ways of working. And the ways of thinking are, how do we think about the enterprise, right? How do we think about value? How do we think about the end customer or constituent? And that has to cross different silos. So the book, I would say, definitely lays out mindset shifts. We talk about accountability and even using strategic business architecture as a way for that, for governance. But we also think that we'd like this book itself to be a way to help teams, right, and leaders be able to change the ways they think and work as well. Brian?
Yeah, definitely. There's nothing like this out there today. And we feel it really fills a hole in the strategy execution literature, consulting, thinking, etc. We did a study about a year ago. We looked at how strategy execution was taught in MBA programs and other graduate business programs. And my premise was that, having been in academia for a while, that we do lip service to it, that we focus on maybe the organizational and human elements, but we really don't get to the how. We talk about change management and negotiation and influence and, a variety of other organizational, and those topics are important, don't get me wrong, but by themselves, they don't get to the how do you actually make this work. And that's what this book does. It really gets to the how. And there's not a lot of how out there in strategy execution today.
Mhm, mhm. And with the how, what are some of the tools that there's so many different project management tools out there? Have you identified a particular tool that aligns with your book where someone can not only start to do the best practice, but also track their best practices?
Yeah, we're both smiling because
Yeah, we are. Go for
we've actually, this is what chapter 3, we've actually defined an ecosystem of different tools. When I say tools, different modeling approaches to model different aspects of the strategy in the organization and how to link them together, how one model provides data to the other, and how to create that line of sight between the strategy and the setting of the strategy and the project portfolio. So we outline a whole ecosystem of tools that interrelate with one another and how you link them together to create this line of sight.
And we also take that same tool set and craft them around a specific set of techniques in chapter 4 that help people to actually translate strategy. It's the how that Brian mentioned, right? That's usually missing. that is bridging the gap between strategy execution. The other tool maybe I'll mention too is in each of the chapters, we have a strategy execution organizational assessment. So it helps organizations reflect on how well are they doing on these ideas so that they can potentially adjust in advance going forward.
Wow. Now, within your consulting practices, have you had companies that have begun to leverage these tools and to track that into the annual performance review settings?
Yeah, definitely. So I've had a number of students. I mentioned the students who go through my class, and what I have them do in the class is actually seek out who does strategic planning in their organizations, and find out what specifically the issues are in the organization. Then they think about that during the semester, and they come back with a set of recommendations. So to make a long story short, I've had a number of people, probably going on a dozen so far, actually get job offers from strategic planning to bring business architecture into that group and get it working. So yeah, it's out there and alive and well and growing. And then through
Indeed.
Wendy's work as well, she's worked with many organizations.
Yeah, I can only add on to that exactly. So I really am lucky. I get to work with a lot of organizations around the world, across sectors, across industries. So I have only seen this uptick over the years of these strategic business architecture practices being built in companies and leveraged for strategy execution. And even beyond that, and this takes a number of years, right? Because it's a human journey, but watching organizations actually build cohesive processes with teams working together from strategy to execution underpinned by business architecture, it's why we're so passionate about the ideas, because we know that they work and we've seen them in action.
What have been some of the obstacles that your clients or have faced in getting the culture to adapt to these new rules, if you will?
You want me to take a
Sure,
stab at that?
sure.
Okay, so a couple obstacles, and I'm sure Whynde has more to add to this. Um, and depending on the organization and the history in the organization, the term business architecture might not have a positive perception. And I tell my students this. So traditionally, and we delineate this in the book, the difference between strategic business architecture and traditional, more execution level business architecture. So traditional execution level business architecture typically grew up within enterprise architecture, which is traditionally part of the of IT, kind of an IT strategic planning group. And in some organizations, they've had failed enterprise architecture efforts. So when you bring this stuff up, depending on the organization, you may not get, necessarily a positive perception. So I tell my students, start with strategy execution. Do you have strategy execution issues? Almost every organization has strategy execution issues. Then once you get into that conversation, then are you aware of the evolving discipline of strategic business architecture as a facilitator of strategy execution? And most people want to hear more because they have the problems and they want to hear how this might alleviate those problems. But we clearly delineate in the book the types of skills and roles needed for a broader, more strategic business architecture group that would be integrated with strategic planning versus a traditional execution level business architecture group, which is typically more technically oriented and concerned about understanding enough of the business for an implementation of a system, more system scope. Both are needed in organizations, but very different types of people and skill sets needed for those two different groups. And I think understanding that is I think a first step in maybe dealing with the obstacle of, maybe some of the legacy perceptions around business architecture. Do you have anything
And
else to add, Whynde?
yeah, the big challenge I will add is silos and fragmentation. Brian and I think that this is one of the leading causes of strategy execution, results that are suboptimal. Different, fragmented accountability for strategy to execution, fragmented teams working on their own goals, right? So One is fragmentation and silos. The other is a real bias towards action. And of course, these things are habitual, but they're also driven by organizational structure and motivational mechanisms. And the reason why this is, of course, such a challenge is because to do strategy execution well and to leverage a strategic business architecture perspective, it's about looking holistically, and it's about the big picture in the long term. And what we see people do is, there's strategies and people react with these laundry lists of initiatives and solutions, and they have their own budgets and their own decision making, but those things don't necessarily add up. We may build things redundantly. We may build fragmented experiences. We may not invest in the thing that makes the best sense for the organization overall. So it's trying to help people appreciate that doing what is best for the enterprise and for the customer is best for all of us. And we need that bigger why to help us transcend those silos.
This discussion takes me back to the book on Taguchi, Total Quality Management, that was written some years ago. And it's having everyone to understand what's our end goal, our overarching goal, and what's the critical path to that, and what resources are going to be applied to that. In your experience, I'm sure you have witnessed companies where, as you said, it's very fragmented. Everyone is doing their own thing. And so it speaks to the people management side of the business. What is your viewpoint in regards to how HR recruiting and job descriptions and objective setting, how that plays into this overall execution challenge that you have?
Yeah.
I,
Go ahead,
yeah,
please.
I think the HR component is important and is not discussed enough for everything you said. Role definition and the fact that it should be collaborating with others, accountability and metrics. And you asked this earlier, Jarell, I didn't respond to it, but it is useful to bake these metrics into performance, right? And rewarding people for collaborating and working together and thinking for the enterprise. Organizational structure, again, in HR is part of it. And then there's just simply the culture, right? So cultures that reward firefighting, or cultures that reward build it like you own it. Like there's all these sort of different nuances, but those things only deepen. So on the flip side, of course, HR structures can help to fix some of this, as can culture, mindset, and messaging. Brian?
Yeah, and we cover this in the book towards the latter sections of the book, that really, if you're going to do strategy execution well, and most organizations don't, you have to address the siloed, the overlaps, and sometimes the competing and redundancy, where you have different groups performing similar functions and they have this internal competition with one another. If you don't address that, strategy execution is probably going to remain elusive to a large degree. So it really has to come, in my mind, this has to be a top-down strategy, because breaking down silos, integrating silos is not an easy thing in any organization. But if you don't recognize it and do it, it's going to remain a challenge. And yes, HR is a big part of that, integrating roles, integrating functions, but it has to be part of a larger strategy driven from the top.
Mm-hmm.
For our audience, your book has 9 phenomenal chapters. Can you walk us through each chapter so the listener can get an idea of what they can expect when they go to buy your book to read it?
You got it. You want me to do?
Sure, go ahead.
Sure. So chapter 1 is more of the introduction to the strategy execution challenges, right? And starts to introduce a little bit of what if, how could it be different? Second chapter then introduces the role of strategic business architecture to create that line of sight, to make strategy execution more effective. Chapter 3, I know we alluded to this one earlier, but that's really the tool set and helping to understand how all the tools fit together. Chapter 4 is step by step. How do you use those tools to translate strategy to shape work? Chapter 5 is on strategic portfolio management. 6 and 7, oh, 6 is on the related teams. So who are the ecosystem of business, other business disciplines, other business functions that work together from strategy to execution. Chapters 7 and 8 are really on the strategic business architecture role, competencies, practice. And then the very last chapter is really the future of business architecture, where we talk about trends, or sorry, and strategy execution trends, AI, sustainability, and things like that. So, Brian, anything to add?
No, I think you hit it well. Great.
And since you mentioned those famous two letters AI, this is a whole new area for the business market to address, and everyone is learning Chat GPT and Gemini and all those other things, but they're really, I think, just trying to figure out, where does it fit within their business. How do you feel that this AI will enhance, or will it kind of handcuff folks for a while? Well, what are your thoughts there, Brian?
Okay, I think it's going to greatly enhance, and I'm excited about it, and I'll tell you why. Um, so one of the chapters in our book deals with developing a capability perspective for the organization, and really, and what business capabilities are, and developing a capability model for the whole organization. And this gets into something we've been talking about in business and strategy for quite a while, the composable organization or composable business, where you can compose business into different components. We're suggesting they be capabilities, and then you can recombine those components, as needs of the business change. The problem that I hear from different organizations is that when you get a lot of components, a lot of capabilities, it's tough to get your arms around what you actually have and how you might recombine it, where the redundancies are. In large, complex organizations, you can have, a rather large database of capabilities, almost too much for any one human being to get their arms around. However, AI can get a good AI could get its arms around what you have, make suggestions for how to recombine things where there might be opportunities for, combining capabilities, where there might be redundancies in the organization, et cetera, and really make this, the promise of a composable organization, of composable business, become a reality in my mind. And I think that's not too far off into the future.
I agree. And let me just emphasize and say it even stronger. As organizations are trying to understand change with AI as a perfect use case, how do we have this powerful tool? How do we leverage it for value? Where do we invest? Where's the ROI? What's the impact of putting it in place? Changes like AI, or there was metaverse and sustainability, right? All these things, organizations need a strategic business architecture to make these decisions in an informed way. It's like having a blueprint of your business, and you can understand, right? Like Brian was saying, which capabilities should we leverage AI for? What are we going to get? What's the impact? And not having a strategic business architecture is sort of the equivalent of, trying to, renovate or, put an addition on your home or break down walls without having a blueprint, right? So it's very much a common. So what a powerful tool to help organizations navigate AI decision making.
Beautiful. I want to make sure that our audience knows how to get in touch with you. And if you could share how someone can get in touch with you to discuss your book, to lecture on your book, hire you as a consultant.
Sure. We're both on LinkedIn. And my email address is at Penn State is bhc103@psu.edu. And like I said, I'm on LinkedIn as well.
And I'll just add the same. LinkedIn is probably good. I have a lot of crazy spellings in my name, so I won't pain your listeners. But the other thing, they can also reach us on our website, theexecutionchallenge.com. So literally just the name of the book. There's a contact form there that goes to Brian and I as well.
So, and thank you for that. And so looking forward, where do you see business today, and how do you feel that your book, The Execution Challenge, will help them to achieve where their goals? Because we understand that we think that there's a lot of value right now that's not tapped, we see the stock market is going crazy, but we see that some of the other factors are not so positive with what. How do you feel that the execution challenge will allow a business to achieve its strategic objectives and its financial goals?
The book allows organizations to change and to react and to be, build with, to Brian's point about composable, right? To build with resilience and agility. It also helps to streamline an organization. So it helps for a more effective business and technology environment. But it's the muscle to get idea into action, whether it's due to global disruption or a new strategy we want to pursue. It's essential really to survive and to thrive.
Mhm.
I think I just might add to that yeah, as you're changing strategy or implementing new strategies, it helps to ensure that the execution level is doing what it needs to do. And that's the big problem with strategy execution. We come up with great strategies, but we can't execute them very well. So that what we outline in the book helps to ensure that you have successful execution.
And so in your discussions with your students, your clients, your colleagues, how do you measure the before and the after? Because everyone wants to know we've implemented this execution challenge. Where were we before? Where are we now?
We actually have a section of the book that talks about value measurement. So
Mhm.
I'm going to leave it to that section of the book. So we outline a methodology that I've used. That's actually one of my main research interests is value measurement for strategic business architecture, because you got to be able to show that you're making an impact. So to your point, how do you what's your before data? Then you implement your and where do you measure? How do you measure? How do you think about it? Because with something like strategic business architecture, it's a multi-year journey. And it's one of those things. So when I talk with folks about this topic, I often hear, we know we've made big impacts over this 3 to 5 year period, or however long that, they've been working with business architecture. But, the old saying, success has 1,000 fathers. So everybody wants to claim association, like, oh yeah, my group had a part of that, my group had a, so you have to be very deliberate and thoughtful and strategic about how and when you're measuring value to make sure your contributions, once you're successful, don't get diluted or kind of lost in the lost in the noise that gets created when everybody's trying to claim association with your successes. So we outline this in great detail in the book.
And value measurement is the key, right? That is the key measurement, but there's also a couple supporting ones more around the process. One is the strategy execution organizational assessment that I mentioned. So how well are you at that muscle to get idea into action? We also have a strategic business architecture maturity model in the book as well. So that's another way to say, how well is your practice working? And then the better it works, obviously, the more value you're going to deliver.
Beautiful. Okay, we're down to literally our last minute and a half. And what I like to ask you to think about and give me a 30-second answer is what type of tool do you have or do you recommend that someone can measure their success in regards to, we've implemented the book. Now, what is the tool that we're going to use to measure?
Okay, I don't know if I can do this in 30 seconds, but I'm going to try. So in the book, we outline a methodology. You can consider the methodology a tool for really understanding what's valued in your organization. So you say, what should we measure? I get this all the time from people, what are the 5 things we should be measuring in our organization? I said, well, you're asking the wrong question. I could give you 5 metrics, 5 KPIs, but they're probably the wrong ones for you, because you need to understand 2 critical things. And I'm going to stop here because I only have 30 seconds. Who are your core stakeholders, major stakeholders? What do they value? What are your core business capabilities and how are they measured? And then we kind of look for an intersection of those KPIs. And then we look at those KPIs that you can influence with your business architecture efforts, and then aligning your value measures with those value measures that matter to the major parts of your organization. And so it's not just rattling off a couple metrics. It's gone through a thoughtful process.
Yeah. And in addition to the other tools we've talked about, and Brian, you mentioned, evidence is also important. Evidence of that different ways of thinking and working. When you see people saying, let's invest in what's the right thing for the enterprise, not let's invest in my pet project. When you see people bringing others, functions, disciplines to the table to collaborate, when they're thinking enterprise, when they're thinking value and customer, then we have arrived.
Well said. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank our guests, Mr. Brian H. Cameron and Ms. Whynde Kuehn, of their book, The Execution Challenge, Driving Great Strategy at Scale. Thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
That wraps it up this week on Leadership with Darrell W. Gunter on Seton Hall's WSOU 89.5 FM station and on the net at WSOU.net. We want you to have a great day, but remember, leadership begins with you.